never going to get that yes unless you try. Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Tara East. I'm a writer, blogger, YouTuber, and the author of the mystery novel Every Time He Dies. And in this week's blog, I want to talk about rejection. So I've had a writing advice blog for about 7 or 8 years now. I've got 220 posts on my website, and I've actually never once spoken about rejection. Why? Because this topic is super common, everyone's written about it, and I felt like I didn't have anything super new to add to the conversation. And maybe this isn't particularly original either, but I feel like it's a really good introduction to rejection. I'm going to provide some general strategies on how to deal with it, as well as just acknowledge in general how kind of crappy it is. As a writing teacher, coach, and editor, I'm very used to talking with students and clients about rejection. Basically, it's just a part of being a writer. It's a simple fact, but that doesn't mean that getting rejected doesn't hurt. When our work is rejected, it can make us doubt the quality of our work, our abilities, and whether or not we're even a real writer. On the worst days, it can even make us question whether or not writing is really worth it. There are numerous reasons why your work could be rejected, and it may have nothing to do with your story. The publisher may have recently published a story that is really similar to yours. They could be totally overwhelmed with submissions, and their lineup for the foreseeable future could be full. They may be experiencing budget cuts, or the publisher could just have some kind of genre biases, like they're looking for very particular work at that point in time and your manuscript just doesn't fit the bill. You'll notice that all of those reasons I just listed are completely outside of your control. When your work is rejected, it's important that you don't take it personally. Now, this isn't easy because for most of us, writing is personal, even when it's fiction. When people read our work, we feel judged. If the reader enjoys our work, we might feel as though our talent and cleverness is being praised. But if we receive feedback that our plot is weak or that our characters are flat, our immediate first thought is, I'm stupid. I don't have it. Who am I kidding? I'm not even a real writer. When you're in the submission or acquisition trenches, it's vital that you develop some really good habits around how to handle your inner critic. Fortunately, I've spoken about this a lot, so I've included a list of previous videos and blogs in the description below. Now, most of us will receive our acceptance letters and rejection letters via email. If you are rejected via email, I urge you, please do not reread that email a million times. Most rejection emails, for starters, are actually automated. Therefore, they're going to contain very little useful information, and rereading them is only going to make you feel worse. If you do receive practical feedback, critical feedback from a publisher, that's actually a good thing. They enjoyed your story enough that they were willing to provide feedback. But I urge you to not apply that feedback straight away unless the editor is willing to work with you on the story or if they've asked to see a revised version for publication. More on this later. If you do receive rejection after rejection, you may reach a point where you do need to assess your approach. You can ask yourself questions like, are you writing professional cover letters? Are you following the format and other general guidelines on the magazine or publisher's website? Are you sending your work to appropriate publishers? So if you're writing a science fiction short story, are you sending it to science fiction magazines? Are the publishers you are submitting to actually open for submissions? Something worth remembering is that Stephen King's Carrie was rejected 30 times. The Help was rejected 60 times, and Chicken Soup for the Soul was rejected 144 times. 144 times. When you're doing the rounds with a short story or a manuscript, it's well worth taking the time to research the market and to develop a top 10 list of dream publishers. Start at the beginning and then work your way down that list. Now be ambitious when you're creating this list. Choose big magazines or big publishing houses because publishing within these markets is super competitive. But if they say yes, then hell yeah, you've reached the jackpot. But you're never going to get that yes unless you try. Now, if your work is rejected by your number one dream publisher, that's okay, just move on to the next one on the list. If your work is rejected by all 10 publishers, then you may need to go back to those rejection letters I mentioned earlier and check if there is any critical feedback. And then I want you to pay attention to that advice, especially if it's repeated. You may also find value in enlisting beta readers to provide additional feedback that can inform your rewrite if you haven't done so already. Now, Robert Heinlein outlined the 5 basic rules of writing, and though they are deceivingly simple, they're incredibly hard to follow. Number 1, you must write. Number 2, you must finish what you write. Number 3, you must refrain from rewriting except to editorial order. 4, you must put your work on the market. 5, you must keep your work on the market until it is sold. The reason why you don't want to drastically edit your work after one rejection is because your story could have been rejected for all of those reasons I mentioned before. There might actually be nothing wrong with your story, the quality of your work. If, however, you have been rejected by at least 10 publishers, then it could be, again though not necessarily, an indication that your work needs more work. After you've applied your edits, you can then either choose to go through your top 10 list again, or you could develop a new list of slightly less competitive markets. Learning how to separate yourself from your work is incredibly valuable during this stage. Rather than seeing yourself as the creator of the work who is trying to get that work published, approach this stage through a business and marketing mindset. You are an industry professional trying to secure a deal. Now, I admit, all of this advice is easier said than done. Last year, I finished working on a short story that is the best thing I've ever written. And for the past few months, I've been submitting that story to all of the big magazines within a particular genre. Magazines that have published some of my favorite authors. Despite everything I just said, when I received my first rejection from my number one publisher, I was super deflated. I was so confident about the story being accepted that for a second I seriously thought the email was a mistake. Then I went on to the second, third, and fourth publisher on the list. And every email I received from those publishers began with the awful adverb, unfortunately. After the second rejection, I was totally convinced that the story needed more work. I thought, well, the story is obviously not that great because 2 publishers said no. Never mind the fact that I picked literally the biggest publishers in the genre, meaning that their market is incredibly competitive. All the advice I give to students totally went out the window because all of a sudden I saw my situation as different. Even though I tell students not to take it personally and to treat submitting work as if it were a business transaction, adopting those techniques is way more difficult than anybody wants to admit. And I think that there's a lot of power in just admitting that it's really kind of crappy to be rejected and that it does hurt. Now, the point of this whole video was, of course, to provide some practical steps and some advice around the whole submission process and how to handle rejection. But it's also just an opportunity for me to acknowledge that getting rejected totally sucks. You don't always have to pretend that you have thick skin. You're allowed to take it personally, at least initially. But you also need strategies that are going to help you move forward. Getting rejected is just part of being a writer. But the only way you receive that acceptance letter is by continuing to put your work out there, even if it means potentially getting hurt. Now, I'd love to hear from you. How do you deal with the rejection phase? I could probably do with some additional advice. So please feel free to leave some comments below and share your rejection stories, how you deal with rejections, and the general submission process. I'd really love to know. Now, if you'd like even more writing advice, you can of course check out the other videos on this channel, or you can visit taraeast.com and dive into the archives. While you're there, please consider joining my email newsletter, because when you do, I'll send you a free gift, which is a 20-minute video called The Follow-Through Formula: How to Complete a Long-Term Writing Project. You'll also receive a newsletter in your inbox every single Thursday morning, including links to that week's blog and video, a short note by me, a quote of the week, and some resources I've recently discovered and think you will too. Thank you so much for being here and for watching this week's video. I really appreciate it. And even though rejection sucks, I hope you keep submitting your work, because the world actually does need more books.